Hi friends, thank you for joining me today. If you've never been to my channel, I'm Jones, and this is where I cook up some delicious and mostly healthy vegan recipes that you are welcome to try at home and highly encouraged because they're good. So today I am trying out a recipe for a plum cake. Now this is using Greengage plums from my garden. You can see I'm picking some off of my one little tree here that grew a lot of plums this year, so I had to figure out what to do with them all. Now, Greengage plums are a little bit different from the traditional, more purplish colored plums that you see in the store. These are very small, very green plums, and they're very tart, but also sweet when you get them at the right stage of ripeness. But like I said, I have a lot of them. So I have some here that I have been storing in the refrigerator because we've been having a real problem with fruit flies and they were attacking all the plums that I had picked. So these are ready to be cut open, and the only really time intensive part of this recipe is getting the pits out of these plums. So you want to cut them in half, and sometimes the pits will come out really easily and sometimes they don't. So you have to kind of cut them out like I'm doing here. But if they're at just the right stage of ripeness, they will come out really easily. And these plums are just gorgeous when you get them cut open inside. The color and the texture is like candy, and they really are yummy. So I'm just gonna fast forward through the pitting of all these plums because it did take a little while, but it is definitely worth the work. And you want to end up with about 1.5 cups of halved plums. I'm going to start the cake part of the recipe by making a flax egg, and this just uses 1 tablespoon of ground flax meal and 3 tablespoons of water. And you'll just mix that together and set it aside to gel. This is a really handy little recipe to know for replacing eggs because it works in just about any kind of baked goods. Now we're going to mix the dry ingredients. I'm using 2 cups of spelt flour, and then I'm going to use some monkfruit sweetener. And really you could use any kind of sweetener you like coconut sugar or regular sugar, but I wanted to give this a try because I wanted to make this as low sugar and as low calorie as possible. This is the first time I've ever used this in a recipe, and it actually turned out pretty good. Then I'm going to add 2 teaspoons of baking powder, a teaspoon of ground cinnamon, half a teaspoon of ground nutmeg, and 1/4 teaspoon of ground cardamom. And I'm just going to mix that together, but I forgot something, 1 cup of hazelnut meal. And I made this just by grounding up 1 cup of hazelnuts in a little blender that I have that I use to grind seeds and flax meal. And now for our wet ingredients, I'm going to add our flax egg and 1/2 cup of applesauce. And this is replacing oil in the recipe, which is one of the reasons why this is actually a recipe test, because I've never replaced oil with something like applesauce before, so it's a little bit of an experiment. I also put in 1 teaspoon of vanilla and 1.5 cups of almond milk. And you could probably use any kind of plant-based milk that you like. Another thing I found with this recipe in the end is that I think I needed to add some vinegar to it to make it more of a buttermilk. And I'm just adding my dry ingredients to the wet and mixing that together to make a nice batter. I also added about 1/2 cup of the cut plums into the batter. I just used the ones that weren't so pretty so they wouldn't look as good on top. Don't want to waste them, so I'm just mixing them very lightly into the batter. Now I'm going to line the pan with some parchment paper, and this is instead of using grease to grease the pan. It's a lot easier to clean up, and it also makes it a lot easier to get the cake out of the pan when you're done, because you can use the paper to just lift it out of the pan. So I'm using the pan as sort of a template for the size I need, and then I'm going to cut 2 strips. Then I'm just placing them crosswise in the pan. And you can see one of the strips was a little bit skinny, so it didn't quite cover the corners, and I did have some corners stick in the end, but that was okay. And now I'm just using this little hack that I learned from Martha Stewart. So you get these little binder clips, and you have to make sure they are all metal, because some of them do have plastic on them and you don't want the plastic to melt in the oven. But you can just clip your paper to the pan, and I only had 2 clips here, so I just did the 2 sides, but it really helps keep the parchment paper from moving around, especially when you're pouring the batter in. Now I'm going to put the nicer half of those cut plums onto the top of the cake. And you know, it doesn't have to be perfect or anything, I just kind of threw them on there. I baked this at 375 degrees for about an hour, which was actually quite a bit longer than I thought it was going to take. Since this is a recipe test and not a tested recipe, you have to forgive me for some, tweaks that I have to make. Like I said, the texture came out a little more dense than I would like, and I think I can solve that by maybe using some different flours, but also by adding that vinegar to the milk. But it was delicious, and I do recommend topping it with something. I was feeling a little too lazy to make some coconut whipped topping or something like that, so I had some raspberry flavored coconut yogurt, and that was really yummy with this. Also, the next day, which is the day I'm recording this voiceover, I tried it with some maple syrup after heating it up in the microwave, and that was super yummy as well. So I will definitely be tweaking this recipe a little bit before I officially post it, but when it's ready, I will have it on my blog at veggerarchy.com, and you will certainly be able to find the link for that in the description box below. So I hope you enjoyed this video, and please give it a thumbs up and leave me a comment about what you thought about this recipe and if it is something that you would try. Do you have Greengage plums in your yard? I'd love to know. Don't forget to subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video. Peace!